Old man, this land is mine now. You'd best learn to live in my world, my son-in-law said, his voice smooth as honey. I listened to every word hidden in the shadows of the old oak, the cloying scent of expensive perfume, the hollow laughter, and the sharp stilettos were trampling the meadow where my daughter had learned to walk. They had turned my farm, the legacy of my ancestors, into a stage for the arrogance of a stranger. He was confident that my trembling signature on a piece of paper had given him everything. He was wrong. The trust he exploited and the arrogance he flaunted were just the opening moves in a much larger game. He didn't know that on the land he thought he'd conquered, a seed of vengeance had been sown long ago by a woman, and tonight it had begun to sprout. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I stood hidden behind the old oak, its rough bark still bearing the scar of the names I'd carved for Sarah and me nearly 40 years ago. This oak was our landmark, a witness to our love and the beginning of everything. But today it was just an unwilling hiding place. From here I could observe the whole absurd charade unfolding on my land without being seen. The scent of freshly cut hay, the familiar smell of home, should have dominated the air. But it didn't. It was suffocated by a cloying mix of expensive perfumes, the aroma of strange foods, and the smell of money, an invisible but ever-present stench of hubris. Sarah, my late wife, would have despised this ostentation. She used to say the land has a soul, and that it feels every footstep upon it. Today, the soul of our farm was being desecrated by hundreds of sharp heels digging into it like daggers, by empty champagne flutes and soulless, forced laughter. They had turned our meadow, where Emily took her first steps, into a stage for their vanity. And there was my daughter, Emily, at the center of it all. In a pristine white wedding dress, she was radiant. She had her mother's smile, the gentle way the corners of her lips curved. But her eyes today were foreign to me. A fog of infatuation clouded them, blinding her to everything but the man standing beside her. She looked at her husband, Mark Sterling, with a devotion I had never seen, an almost absolute worship. And him, Mark Sterling, my son-in-law, he was a perfect work of artifice, sleek hair, a tailored suit that fit just so, and a smile that never left his face. But to an old soldier like me, who had learned to read men by the smallest details in a war zone, Mark's smile was that of a fox surveying a henhouse. It never reached his eyes. Those eyes were always darting, not looking for friends, but assessing, calculating, seeking an advantage. He looked at my land not with the appreciation of a son, but with the eyes of a conqueror. In their perfect picture, I was just an obsolete detail. An old farmer in a dated suit, pulled from the closet after years, the shoulders a bit frayed. I was a living ornament, a testament to the humble origins my daughter had risen from to get here today. I heard the whispers behind my back, the pitying glances. "That's Mark's father-in-law. Looks a bit rough, doesn't he?" "Good. In the army, they teach you that the man the enemy pays the least attention to is the most dangerous. Let them think I'm a harmless old man. Their complacency would be my greatest ally." I took a deep breath, trying to find a trace of the familiar earth, and stepped out from my cover. I had to try. One last time. I walked toward Emily, who was beaming as she accepted congratulations from some wealthy couple. "Emily?" I said softly. She turned, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second when she saw me. "Dad, where have you been?" "Just around. You look beautiful, sweetheart." I wanted to say more. I wanted to pull her aside, to shake her awake, to ask if she truly knew the man she was marrying. But before I could utter another word, an arm draped over my shoulder. "Father-in-law," Mark's voice boomed, smooth and controlling. "I've been looking all over for you. Everyone wants to meet the man who made all this possible." He positioned himself between Emily and me, a casual but deliberate move, severing the fragile connection between us. He turned to her, his voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Honey, why don't you mingle?" "I'll take Dad to meet a few friends." Emily nodded instantly, her gaze returning to its state of worship. Mark squeezed my shoulder, just enough for me to feel the strength and the warning behind it. He guided me toward a group of suited men gathered around a bar table. "Gentlemen," Mark announced, "this is my wonderful father-in-law, John Carter." The men turned, their unfamiliar faces appraising me from head to toe. I saw in their eyes a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "This is Mr. Miller, a major partner in our upcoming project," Mark said, gesturing to a heavy-set man with a gaudy gold watch. "He's a great admirer of your farm." Miller extended a soft, fleshy hand to grasp my rough, calloused one. "Mr. Carter, I hear you built this place with your own 2 hands. Very admirable. But times change, don't they? Time to hang up the shovel and rest." The words were couched as a compliment, but they dripped with condescension. I just nodded, saying nothing, continuing to play my part. Mark laughed, the laugh of a victor. "Exactly. My father has worked hard his whole life." He clapped me hard on the back, a gesture that was anything but friendly. It was an assertion of dominance, a silent declaration to his partners. "This old man, like this land, now belongs to me." His touch ignited the embers of my anger into a cold fire, but I extinguished it just as quickly. Not yet. I looked Mark straight in the eye, the look of a soldier staring down the barrel of an enemy's gun, but only for a moment. Then I let my head hang, my shoulders slump, appearing as a truly weary and defeated old man. The battle hadn't started, but the lines had been drawn. And they were drawn right here, on the soil my ancestors had poured their sweat and blood into preserving. Mark had declared war, and he had no idea that this old farmer had just accepted his declaration. The party quieted as Mark stepped onto the makeshift stage erected in the middle of the meadow. A spotlight hit him, making him the center of attention. He took the microphone, and that vulpine smile played on his lips. I stepped back, melting into the shadows of the oak tree to watch. I knew the main act was about to begin. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," Mark's voice rang out, warm and charismatic, amplified across the field by an expensive sound system. "Today is the happiest day of my life because I've married the woman of my dreams, Emily." He cast a look of feigned adoration at my daughter. Emily responded with a radiant smile, completely lost in the moment. "But," Mark continued, his voice catching with practiced emotion, "I wouldn't have this happiness without one great man. A father who worked tirelessly, who sacrificed his entire life on this land to raise Emily into the woman she is today. That man is my father-in-law, Mr. John Carter." All eyes turned to me. I could feel them, hundreds of curious, prying eyes. I remained still, my face a mask. Mark's words were honeyed poison, painting a picture of a devoted father, a respectable old farmer who deserved a rest, to enjoy his golden years with his family. But to my ears, his words were the hiss of a serpent. Every syllable was part of the trap tightening around me. He was building the perfect moral justification for what was to come. And then he delivered the killing blow. "To show our infinite gratitude," Mark said, his tone turning solemn, "and to ensure that Dad will have the most comfortable retirement, free from the worries of this demanding land, we have a gift." He bent down and retrieved a portfolio and a gold-plated fountain pen from a briefcase on the stage. He held them up for everyone to see. "A wedding gift," he declared. The air went still. Even the rustle of the wind in the leaves seemed to cease. I knew what was in that portfolio, the deed transfer papers. The wedding gift he spoke of was this land, the legacy of my ancestors, my sweat, my blood, the memories of Sarah and me. He wanted me to sign it, right here, right now, in front of hundreds of people. A psychologically perfect finishing move. He had left me no way out. If I refused, I'd be the stubborn, selfish old man spoiling his daughter's big day. If I agreed, I would lose everything. I looked at Emily. She was as surprised as everyone else, her eyes wide, but the surprise lasted only seconds. Mark's venom had sunk too deep. When our eyes met, I saw a plea in hers. "Dad, don't make a scene," her eyes seemed to say. She didn't understand. She only saw a thoughtful husband looking out for his father-in-law's future, and a father who seemed about to fly into an unprovoked rage. A pang shot through my heart. The pain didn't come from the public humiliation. A soldier like me had faced far worse. The pain came from my daughter's innocence, from how completely she had been blinded. He had turned my own daughter into a weapon against me. In that instant, any hesitation I had vanished. The plan was already in motion. My role had been cast. I had to play it to perfection, the part of a defeated, helpless, and heartbroken old man. I let my body follow the script. I let my hands, calloused hands that could choke the life out of a man, begin to tremble controllably. I let my steady shoulders, which had carried this farm for so many years, slump as if the weight of old age and disappointment had just crashed down upon me. I heard the click, click, click of cameras. They were documenting my defeat. Good. Let them. Let them capture the fall of John Carter in perfect clarity. I slowly stepped out of the shadows and toward the stage. Each step felt heavy as lead. I could feel the pitying stares, hear the whispers. I looked at no one but Mark. He stood there, a triumphant smile unconcealed. I climbed the rickety wooden steps. I didn't say a word. In this context, my silence was an admission of defeat. Mark held out the portfolio and pen. I didn't take them right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring of keys for the barn and the main gate. The heavy old iron keys clinked in the silent air. They were a symbol of authority, of ownership. With a slow, dramatic gesture, I placed the keys into Mark's open palm. My trembling hand, a tremor I controlled to the finest detail, brushed against his soft one. Then I took the pen. I flipped to the last page of the portfolio, to the waiting signature line. I didn't bother to read a single word. I knew its contents were as venomous as the man who'd drafted it. I signed my name, a shaky, sprawling signature, nothing like my usual firm hand. The moment my pen lifted, thunderous applause erupted. They were clapping for Mark's filial piety, for my sacrifice. They were clapping for a play they believed was real. I didn't stay for the false accolades. I turned and slowly descended the stage. I walked past Emily. She looked at me, a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but mostly relief. Relief that I hadn't made a scene. I kept walking, straight through the crowd that was beginning to raise their glasses in celebration. No one stopped me. For them, my part in the play was over. I walked toward the shadows of the trees, toward the familiar silhouette of my house. I never once looked back. Leaving the party wasn't surrender. It was the start of another war. My war. The silence after the wedding didn't last long. The very next morning, while I was still picking up the empty bottles and discarded ribbons that littered the meadow like scars, the first pickup truck arrived. It wasn't a neighbor's. It was sleek and white, with the logo of some construction company on the door. Mark wasn't wasting a second. His men spilled out, carrying rolls of white blueprints and surveying equipment that looked like weapons from another world. They were cold, soulless, and utterly alien amidst the green of the farm. They walked on the ground where Sarah had planted her first seeds, where roots had clung to the soil for generations. I heard them talk about leveling this area, Lot 7B, the gradient for the drainage system. They spoke of my land as if it were a lifeless body on an operating table, ready to be dissected without a shred of remorse. To them, I didn't exist. I was a ghost haunting my own home. They walked past me, sometimes talked right through me, as if I were part of the air. I didn't object. I didn't speak. I let them have free rein, making myself a small, harmless detail in the background. Invisibility is a scout's best cloak, and I watched. I silently observed every detail. I memorized every face, every license plate. I watched them drive red-painted wooden stakes into the ground, marking their territory on my land. Each stake they hammered in felt like a knife in my heart, but my face remained as calm as a still lake. My anger was compressed, transformed into a cold, focused energy. Mark appeared from time to time, pacing like a general surveying a battlefield. He no longer possessed the calm confidence of the wedding. He was growing impatient. I'd often see him in a corner of the yard, snarling into his phone. His conversations grew more and more tense. One afternoon, while I was fixing a hinge on the chicken coop door, I heard his voice drift from the porch. He thought I was too far away to hear. He was wrong. The hearing of a man used to sleeping in the jungle is not like that of ordinary people. "I don't care," he hissed. "The deadline is the end of the month. The investors won't wait. I already gave them my word." A pause. Then he continued, his voice lowered but laced with menace. "Look, I've got the land. The hard part is done. I just have to deal with the old man. Wire me the money and let me handle the rest." The fox was being squeezed by his own trap. He was out of money. The investors were pressuring him. His back was against the wall. He thought getting my signature was the hard part, but he had no idea that was when the hard part for him was just beginning. He didn't know that I was waiting for this exact moment, the moment he was at his most confident and his most vulnerable. To reinforce my role, I continued my daily chores. Early in the morning, I'd go out to feed the chickens. Their clucking and the familiar smell of the coop centered me. Midday, I'd walk the fence line, checking for rotted posts and replacing them. I drove each nail slowly, methodically. The strangers watched me, shaking their heads with smug amusement. In their eyes, I was a senile old man clinging to decay, oblivious to the storm about to sweep it all away. They didn't understand. Mending the fence wasn't about holding on to the past. It was an old soldier's habit. When preparing for battle, you fortify your position, you ensure everything within your control is secure. More importantly, the monotonous manual labor kept my mind sharp, focused. Day after day, the charade continued. By day, I was harmless old John Carter. But every night, when the last truck drove away, returning the farm to its quiet state, when the moon hung over the barn and only the crickets kept me company, I began my real work. I walked into the house, not turning on the lights. The darkness was my friend. I went straight to Sarah's old study, a place none of them dared to venture. The door closed behind me. The outside world disappeared. The real war had just begun. The study door closed, cutting me off from the artificial world outside. The room was cloaked in familiar darkness, but I didn't need light. I knew every footstep, the position of every object in this room by heart. This was my sanctuary, the only place on the farm that felt impervious to the ghost of Mark and his cronies. The air still held her scent, a strange but comforting mixture. Old paper from her agronomy books, dried lavender she hung by the window, and the faint earthy smell of soil samples she'd bring in to study. I knelt on the wooden floor right beside her sturdy oak desk. My hand slid across the planks until I found a nearly invisible scratch, our signal. I pried at it with my fingernail. A floorboard creaked softly and popped loose. Beneath it wasn't a dusty void, but a military green metal box, an old ammunition case. It was cold and heavy in my hands. It held no love letters or old photographs. My Sarah was more practical than that. Love, she'd said, was shown through acts of protection, not empty words. I placed the box on the desk and unlatched it. Inside, laid out with the neat, orderly precision that was so her, was my entire arsenal. On top was a stack of detailed geological maps of the entire region, not just our farm. They were meticulously hand-drawn, with notes and symbols that only I could understand. Sarah had spent years hiking these hills, collecting samples and recording her findings. At the time, I thought it was just her passion. Now I understood. It was preparation. Beneath the maps was a carefully bound legal portfolio. The language was complex, but I had read it hundreds of times. Sarah's will, the articles of the trust she'd established, mineral and water rights certificates, all drafted by a top law firm in the city, an expense I had thought unnecessary at the time. Sarah had laughed and said, "Better to have armor and never need it than to need it and not have it." She had been right. And finally, at the bottom of the box lay a worn, leather-bound journal. This was the key to everything. I turned the yellowed pages. It wasn't written in ordinary language. Sarah had turned it into a game for the two of us. The journal was written in a private code based on a system of military map coordinates, tactical terms, and private memories only she and I shared. Each coordinate led to a note on a map. Each term described a clause in the legal documents. It was a perfect battle plan. Sarah had always been preparing for a war. She knew this land was too valuable and that human greed was bottomless. I remembered a night years ago, sitting on the porch, looking out at the cornfield under the moonlight. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "John, the land doesn't just feed us. It's a weapon. It can protect itself as long as someone knows how to use it. You have to know when to use it." I gently stroked the journal's cover. "The time has come, my love." From the box, I took out an old but still functional satellite phone. I powered it on. The monochrome screen lit up, showing a few weak bars of signal. I punched in a number from memory. After a few long rings, a voice answered on the other end. No greeting, just expectant silence. "Badger, it's me," I said quietly, my voice low and steady. "I read you, Captain," the voice on the other end replied, crisp and professional. Badger was the comms specialist in my old unit, a genius hacker who now ran a cybersecurity firm. He owed me his life after an ambush in the valley. "I've got a reconnaissance mission for you. Target, Mark Sterling." "Spell it," Badger said. I could hear the clatter of a keyboard. I spelled Mark's name. "I need everything. Financials, connections, habits, weaknesses, especially recent transactions. Dig deep." "Timeline?" "ASAP, top priority," I ordered. A short pause. "Roger that, Captain," Badger replied. The call ended. I set the phone down, feeling a familiar energy flow through my veins, the feeling of a campaign beginning. I opened Sarah's journal, placing it beside the map. The night was long, and my work was just getting started. The next few days passed in tense silence. To the outside world, I was still the doddering farmer John Carter, puttering around with my daily chores. But at night, Sarah's study transformed into a command center, and intelligence, the sharpest of all weapons, began to flow in. Badger did not disappoint. He breached Mark's systems as easily as a badger digging through soft earth. Encrypted emails, bank statements from the Caymans, records of massive online gambling losses. It all came to me through a secure channel. A picture of Mark Sterling began to emerge, not of a successful real estate developer, but of a gambler drowning in debt. He had taken loans from dangerous people, had pre-sold units in a ghost project on my land. This farm wasn't an investment opportunity for him. It was his only life raft to keep from being pulled under by his creditors. But Badger wasn't my only soldier on this battlefield. Another old friend, Frank, a scout from my squad, was now a private investigator. Frank wasn't a tech guy, but he had the eyes of a hawk. Frank sent me photographs, pictures of Mark meeting his partners in dimly lit parking garages and cheap bars. His partners didn't wear suits. They were men with scarred faces and tattooed wrists, who always looked over their shoulders as if expecting a raid. This wasn't business. This was a deal with the devil. In one photo, I saw Mark cowering before a large man, his face pale with fear. The fox now looked more like a cornered rat. While my old friends gathered ammunition, I spent my time studying Sarah's treasure. I spread the geological map on the desk, cross-referencing it with the notes in her journal. A massive, pure aquifer, a reserve of rare earth minerals sufficient to supply the tech industry for years. She had seen the future, a sustainable and prosperous one. Mark, on the other hand, saw only concrete blocks and quick profits. He was too stupid, too short-sighted, to understand the true value of what he was trying to steal. He wanted to level a gold mine to plant a few cabbages. In the midst of this silent war, I noticed a change on the public front. Emily grew sadder each day. Her smiles were forced, her eyes often distant. Mark, stressed by his debts, no longer had the patience to play the part of the perfect husband. He was irritable, snapping at her over trivial things. One late afternoon, as the setting sun painted the sky purple, I saw Emily walking alone toward the stables. I was already there, grooming our old horse, Sundance. She walked in, her eyes red. She stood still for a long time, just staring into space. "Dad," she called out softly. "Mark, he's so different." I stopped my work and turned to my daughter. I could have told her the whole truth right then. I could have shown her all the evidence, exposed her husband for the fraud he was. But I didn't. A wound you discover yourself makes you stronger than one that's pointed out to you. I needed Emily to get back on her own feet. I didn't rush. I just walked quietly to an old wooden chest where I kept a few odds and ends. I took out a brown envelope. Inside was a photo Frank had taken last week. I handed it to her. In the picture, Mark was at a fancy restaurant. He wasn't alone. His arm was around another woman, a young, beautiful blonde, and they were laughing together intimately. Emily stared at the photo, her lips trembling. She didn't cry. She just clenched the picture in her hand, her knuckles turning white. I placed a hand on her shoulder, gently. "Sometimes what we want to believe isn't the truth, sweetheart." I left her alone with that cruel reality. I knew she would be in pain, that she would be shattered, but I also knew she had her mother's strength inside her. The seed of doubt, once planted, would sprout on its own, and I would be there, waiting until it was strong enough to stand as a mighty tree. I didn't have to wait long. A few nights later, as I was reviewing the documents, the door to Sarah's study creaked open. Emily entered. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, but the shattered, lost look from the stables was gone. In its place, her eyes held a cold, hard resolve I hadn't seen in a very long time. She didn't speak, just quietly walked over and sat in the chair opposite me, her mother's old leather chair. She placed a stack of papers on the desk. "I hired someone," she said, her voice flat. "A forensic accountant. This is what he found." I glanced at the papers. It was a detailed analysis of Mark's debts, the shell corporations he'd created, the shadowy cash flows. She had found the truth herself, and dug even deeper than I had shown her. "I was so stupid," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I believed every word he said." "I turned my back on you." Quote. "No," I cut her off, my voice firm but gentle. I reached across the desk and took her trembling hand in mine. "You weren't stupid. You were in love. Trust isn't a weakness, Emily. Being deceived is the other person's crime." I let her sit in silence for a moment, letting my words sink in. "Your mother used to say," I continued, "that the Carters never break. We may stumble, we may fall, but we always get back up, stronger. Now, it's time to use your mother's intelligence to fix this." That's when I decided to show her the entire plan. Piece by piece, I explained everything. I showed her Sarah's coded journal, explaining the coordinate system and the military terms. I unrolled the geological map, pointing out the blue lines marking the aquifer and the red-circled areas rich with rare earth minerals. I had her read the will, pointing to the clause about the trust in her name and the condition that activated upon deceit or coercion. Emily's eyes widened, moving from astonishment to understanding, and finally to a profound admiration for the mother she thought she knew so well. She never knew her mother was not just a farmer, but a brilliant strategist, a woman who had seen the future and prepared the weapons to defend her family. "So, all of this," she stammered, "is yours," I affirmed. "Your mother entrusted it to you. She trusted you would know what to do when the time came, and that time is now." For the first time in months, I saw the fire return to my daughter's eyes. It wasn't the fire of naive dreams. It was the Carter fire, forged in steel, sharp, and impossible to extinguish. The fragility was gone, replaced by the hardness of someone ready for a fight. "So, what's the next move, Captain?" she asked, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. I smiled back. My daughter was truly home. "That's where I need you," I replied. "I'm good with tactics, but you're good with business. You understand people like Mark. You know their weaknesses." We leaned over the desk together under the warm lamplight. Emily, with her sharp business mind, quickly pointed something out. "Mark's greatest weakness isn't his debt," she said, her finger tapping a report. "It's his pride. He needs to appear successful, to be admired. He would rather die than be humiliated in front of the crowd he's so desperate to impress." And just like that, the final stage of the plan was drawn. Not a clandestine confrontation, but a public spectacle, a grand stage where Mark's own pride would be the noose that hanged him. We would let him walk to the gallows he had built for himself. The front yard of the farm had become a stage for his arrogance. A large screen was mounted on the back of a flatbed truck, expensive speakers blared obnoxious jazz, and a long banquet table was laden with extravagant food that Sarah would never have allowed on this land. The harsh afternoon sun beat down, glinting off champagne glasses, creating a glittering but soulless scene. Mark Sterling stood at the center of it all, in his expensive suit, his hair slick, a victorious smile plastered on his face. He was chatting with a group of well-dressed people, the investors, who I knew were just crocodiles waiting to be fed. They were all laughing, raising their glasses, lost in the illusion of a wealthy future built on the sweat and blood of my family. I stood at the edge of the crowd, no longer hiding in the shadows of the oak. Today, I stepped into the light, ready for the final act. I wore my old uniform, the olive-drab jacket faded and creased, but freshly pressed. The smell of old fabric, of battle and endurance, gave me a sense of solidity. It wasn't Mark's silk suit, but it was a soldier's armor. Beside me was Emily. She wasn't wearing a pristine white wedding gown, but a charcoal gray business suit that highlighted a strength and resolve I hadn't seen in a long time. The infatuation in her eyes was gone, replaced by the steely gaze of someone ready for battle. We walked forward together, not fast, not slow, each step heavy with confidence. The crunch of our shoes on the gravel drew attention. One by one, then all at once, the crowd turned to look at us. Their smiles faded, their half-raised glasses froze in midair. Mark saw us. His smile twisted, then vanished, replaced by a frightening pallor. He tried to maintain his composure, but I saw the confusion in his eyes, the panic beginning to bubble beneath his smug exterior. He never expected I would dare to do this. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his usually smooth voice now laced with confusion, almost a plea. I didn't answer him. I walked straight into the middle of the crowd, stood opposite Mark, and let the afternoon sun fall on my face like a spotlight. I looked directly at the crowd, at the strangers whose gazes were no longer filled with pity, but with curiosity and doubt. "I am John Carter," I said, my voice not loud, but carrying immense authority. "And this is my land." My words echoed in the sudden silence, like an unexpected clap of thunder. No one spoke. The tension was as tight as a bowstring. All eyes were fixed on us, waiting for something to happen. Mark tried to regain control, but it was too late. Emily gave Badger the signal. Suddenly, the large screen behind Mark, which had been displaying a 3D rendering of golden meadows with its concrete towers and artificial gardens, flickered. It turned a brilliant green, filled with cascading numbers and lines of code. He spun around, staring at the screen in horror. All eyes followed his, and then the evidence Badger had collected began to appear. First, a detailed map, with areas circled in red and annotated. Land mortgaged to Bank X. Land pre-sold to Company Y. Next came the bank statements from the Caymans, showing huge withdrawals, loans from names that even I, an old soldier, recognized as belonging to mob outfits. "Mark Sterling has borrowed millions of dollars from some of the most dangerous men in the city to finance a ghost project on land he does not own," a man's voice announced from the speakers, a stranger's voice that I knew belonged to the lawyer I had secretly retained on Sarah's advice. "And here is the proof." Reporters began to push forward to photograph the screen, flashbulbs popping like lightning before a storm. Mark's investors began to whisper, their faces turning ashen. They weren't fools. They recognized the names and the enormous sums, and they understood they had been duped. Mark, his face white, tried to shout, "Turn that off! They're lying to you. This is a misunderstanding." He lunged for one of the cables, but one of Badger's men blocked him. Rage and desperation had stripped him of all reason. He turned on me, his eyes bloodshot. You stupid old man," he screamed. "What do you think you're doing? I'll sue you. I'll expose you. You'll regret this." Mark, my lawyer, a polished man named David, stepped out from the crowd, holding another portfolio. "Perhaps you should listen. I am David Hayes, counsel for the Carter family." David didn't say much. He just held up Sarah's will. According to the terms of this will, all of Mrs. Sarah Carter's assets were placed in a trust, administered by her daughter, Emily. This trust cannot be transferred if there is evidence of deceit or coercion. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see on that screen is that evidence. Therefore, any and all documents Mark Sterling holds are null and void. His words were the final blow. The investors began to leave, no longer interested in Mark or his pride. They were interested in their money, and they realized Mark couldn't give it to them. The show was over. Mark stood alone on his empty stage, amidst the whispers and angry muttering. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with despair and a horrifying understanding. Just then, the wail of police sirens grew louder. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and officers emerged, their steps firm and purposeful. "Mark Sterling?" one officer asked. "That's him," I replied, my voice steady, without a trace of hesitation. "And all the evidence you need is right here." Mark's face drained of its last color. His debt was no longer just to me, but to the law. He had lost. The curtain had fallen. As one of the officers pulled out a pair of cold steel handcuffs, something snapped in his eyes. Not remorse, but a final, desperate explosion of hatred and perceived injustice. He tried to wrench himself free, his bloodshot eyes locked on me. The veins in his neck bulged, his face flushed with rage. "Why me?" he roared, his voice raw, like the cry of a wounded beast. "You miserable old bastard! You've destroyed everything. Why me?" His words were meant to be daggers, but I just stood there, calm. His question wasn't a question. It was an accusation, a howl of despair. But it was the one question I needed to answer. Not for the crowd, not for Emily, but for him. A truth he had to face before the darkness consumed him. I walked toward him slowly, my steps as steady as they were on a long march. I closed the distance between us, letting his furious gasps subside into ragged, tense breaths. He was still struggling, but I could see fear creeping into his eyes. The fox had become a cornered rat, realizing it was trapped in a maze of its own making. I stood face to face with him, inches away. His hot, foul breath washed over me. I saw the confusion, the rage, and finally, the absolute helplessness in his eyes. An officer had a firm grip on his shoulder, but I held up a hand. "Let me." The officer hesitated, then relaxed his hold. I leaned in close to Mark's ear, close enough for him to hear every word, but soft enough for no one else to. 40 years ago, a lawyer named Sterling tried to swindle this land from my parents, your father." Mark's eyes went wide. I felt him flinch, a jolt of sudden, horrifying recognition. The blood drained from his face. He wasn't just realizing his own failure. He was realizing he was carrying a karmic debt from his father. He thought he was a predator, but he was just a pawn in a game that had been playing out for decades. "He failed," I continued, my voice a whispered curse. "Sarah and I won, but he never forgot, and neither did I. You think this started when you married my daughter, but it didn't. This started a long time ago, Mark. You're just walking the last few feet of his failed path. Your father's legacy wasn't an empire, it was a curse, and you, just like him, were never going to have this land." I stepped back, letting the words sink in. He stood motionless, all the fight gone out of him. His eyes no longer held anger, they held pure terror. He was looking at me not as an old farmer, but as a ghost, a specter of vengeance who had waited patiently for half a century. He wasn't just being arrested for fraud. He was being called to account for a debt passed down from the previous generation, and today I had collected with interest. An officer stepped forward and cuffed him. "Mark Sterling, you're under arrest for fraud and money laundering." The metallic click of the cuffs echoed in the quiet, a small sound with immense finality. It didn't just bind his hands, it locked the door on the life he thought he had secured. Mark didn't say another word. He was led away, stumbling, his head bowed. He had arrived a conqueror and was leaving a convict. I watched him go, watched his back disappear into the police car, and felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. As the car pulled away, its sirens silent, stillness returned to the farm. It was the quiet not of the storm, but of the storm having passed. The sun began to set, bathing the sky and the rolling wheat fields in gold. Emily and I stood on the porch, looking out at the horizon. The expensive cars, the hollow laughter, the prying eyes were all gone. It was just the two of us, and a peace that had been absent for far too long. I walked to the old porch swing I had built for Sarah, where we used to sit together every evening. Its familiar creak under my weight was like a song of memory. I motioned for Emily to join me. She hesitated for a moment, then sat beside me. We sat in silence. No words were needed. The war was over. Everything had been said. Everything had been done. This silence was comfortable, a silence of understanding, of forgiveness, of homecoming. I felt relief seep into my very bones. I could finally breathe after a long, drawn-out campaign. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out Sarah's old journal, the legacy she had left behind. I placed it in Emily's hands. "Your mother's legacy isn't just in the ground," I said, my voice low and full of love. "It's in here." I placed my hand on her chest, over her heart. Resilience, intelligence, the strength to protect what you love, you get all of that from her. Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with admiration, then with emotion. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not a tear of weakness, but of release. She could finally face what had happened, from her own blindness to the pain of betrayal. "Dad, you knew all along? Your mother prepared for this. She knew this land was too valuable. She trusted you to be strong enough to stand on your own when the time came." A small, genuine smile touched Emily's lips. It wasn't the forced smile from the wedding, not the smile from when Mark was deceiving her. It was her mother's smile, a smile of peace and confidence, forged in a storm. "The war is over, daughter," I said, feeling a wave of emotion swell in my own chest. "The farm is safe. My daughter is home. Sarah, you can rest now. Mission accomplished." Together, we watched the fields stretching out before us, where a new future was waiting. The fields would be planted again, and this time the seeds would sprout from truth and resilience under the light of a true new dawn. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. If you've ever been through a similar situation or have any thoughts on this story, please share them in the comments so we can discuss them together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.